The chamber was silent. Admiral Una Park stood before the Galactic Council, her hands steady at her sides, even as the weight of 1 billion human lives pressed down upon her shoulders. The 12 council members watched her from their elevated seats, their alien faces showing no mercy, no understanding, and no regret. "The vote is final," the High Speaker announced. His voice echoed through the vast hall like the sound of a hammer striking stone. The creature was tall and thin, with skin like polished silver and eyes that held no warmth. "Humanity is hereby banished from all council space. You have 30 standard days to remove yourselves. Any human found within our borders after this time will be executed." Una did not flinch. She had expected this outcome. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for only 50 years, a mere heartbeat in the long history of the galaxy. They had tried to follow the rules. They had tried to be good members. But it was never enough. "May I ask why?" Una said. Her voice was calm, controlled. "What crime have we committed?" The council members shifted uncomfortably. A few of them exchanged glances. Finally, a different member spoke. This one was covered in thick purple scales, with 4 arms folded across its chest. "You breed too quickly," it said. "Your population has doubled in 50 years. You take resources that belong to older species. You ask too many questions. You push too hard. You do not know your place." Una felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. She had served in the military for 30 years. She knew how to control her emotions. "We only wanted to be part of something greater," she said. "We only wanted to help." The High Speaker leaned forward. "Help? Your kind does not understand the word. You consume everything you touch. You are like a fire that cannot be put out. The council has decided. You will go to the Fringe, where you belong." The Fringe. Una had heard stories about that place. It was the edge of known space, a region of dying stars and empty worlds. Species that had been forgotten by the galaxy lived there, struggling to survive among the ruins of dead civilizations. It was a place of no hope, no future, no mercy. "You are sending us to die," Una said. "We are sending you away," the High Speaker replied. "What happens after that is not our concern." Una stood there for a long moment. She looked at each council member in turn, memorizing their faces. She knew she would never forget this day. She knew humanity would never forget. "Very well," she said at last. "We will go. But remember this moment. Remember what you have done here today. Because we will remember." She turned and walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind her with a sound like the end of the world. The journey to the Fringe took 3 months. Una commanded the Exodus fleet from the bridge of the battleship Hope's Light. It was an old name, given by the first generation of space travelers. Now it felt like a cruel joke. The fleet consisted of over 1,000 ships. Some were military vessels, armed and ready for battle. Others were civilian transports, packed with families who had left everything behind. There were hospital ships, cargo ships, and research vessels. Together, they carried the last remnants of human civilization. Una spent most of her time on the bridge, watching the stars pass by on the main screen. She did not sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the council members. She heard their words echoing in her mind. "Admiral?" A voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see a young officer standing beside her. His name was Taeho Kim, and he served as her chief diplomat. He was tall and thin, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He was only 30 years old, but he had already proven himself to be one of the most skilled negotiators in the fleet. "What is it?" Una asked. "The crew is worried," Taeho said. "They want to know what will happen when we reach the Fringe. They want to know if there is any hope." Una sighed. She had been asking herself the same question for months. I wish I could give them an answer, she said. But the truth is, I do not know. We are going into the unknown. We will have to build our future from nothing. Tejo nodded slowly. Then perhaps that is exactly what we should tell them. Perhaps we should tell them that we have a chance to start over. To create something new. Yuna looked at him with surprise. You really believe that? I have to believe it, Tejo said. Because if I do not, then what is the point of going on? Yuna considered his words. He was right, of course. Hope was all they had left. And sometimes, hope was enough. Prepare a message for the fleet, she said. Tell them that we are not going to die in the Fringe. Tell them that we are going to survive. Tell them that one day we will return. And when we do, the galaxy will never forget us again. The first sight of the Fringe was not what anyone expected. Yuna had imagined a wasteland, a region of empty space filled with dead worlds and dying stars. But what she saw was something different. The Fringe was a live dot as the fleet emerged from hyperspace, the main screen filled with images that took Yuna's breath away. There were planets everywhere, some green and blue, others red and orange. There were stations floating in the void, their lights blinking like distant stars. There were ships moving between the worlds, small and fast, going about their business. This is not what the Council told us, Tejo said, his voice filled with wonder. They said the Fringe was empty. They lied, Yuna replied. They wanted us to be afraid. They wanted us to lose hope before we even arrived. A communication signal appeared on the screen. Someone was trying to contact the fleet. Yuna nodded to the communications officer, and a moment later, a face appeared on the display. It was not a human face. The creature had scales of deep green, with golden eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Its features were sharp and angular, like a lizard made human. When it spoke, its voice was rough, but not unkind. Human vessels, this is Commander Vorik of the Valkyrie Defense Force. You have entered Fringe space. State your purpose. Yuna stepped forward. I am Admiral Yuna Park of the Human Exodus Fleet. We have been banished from Council space. We seek a place to live, a place to start again. We mean no harm to anyone here. There was a long pause. The Valkyrie commander studied her through the screen, its golden eyes searching for something. Finally, it spoke again. The Council sent you here? To die? Yes, Yuna said simply. Another pause. Then, to Yuna's surprise, the Valkyrie made a sound that might have been laughter. The Council thinks the Fringe is a graveyard, Vorik said. They think we are all dead or dying. They are wrong. We are very much alive. And anyone who the Council fears is someone we might call a friend. Yuna felt something stir in her chest. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten. It was hope. We would be honored to be your friend, she said. Then come, Vorik replied. Come to our world. Rest your people. And then we will talk about the future. Because here in the Fringe, we have learned one important lesson. The Council is not as powerful as they think. And those they throw away have a way of coming back stronger. The screen went dark. Yuna turned to face her crew, and for the first time in months, she smiled. You heard the commander, she said. Set course for the Valkyrie homeworld. Our exile has just become something else. It has become a beginning. The ships of the human fleet move forward together, flying toward a new destiny. Behind them, the stars of Council space faded into the distance. Ahead, the lights of the Fringe burned bright with promise. Yuna stood on the bridge and watched the future approach. She thought about everything humanity had lost. Their homes, their place in the galaxy, their sense of belonging. But she also thought about what they still had. Their determination, their hope, their stubborn refusal to give up. The Council had wanted to destroy them. Instead, They had given humanity something far more dangerous. They had given them a reason to fight thought, and in the fringe, among the forgotten and the abandoned, humanity would find allies who shared that same fire. Together, they would build something the Council had never imagined. They would build a coalition. They would build an army. They would build a future, but that was still to come. For now, the first step was simply to survive Dot as the Vulturi world grew larger on the screen. Una made a silent promise to herself and to all the humans who had followed her into exile. She promised that they would not just survive. They would thrive. They would grow strong. And one day, they would return to Council space not as beggars or refugees, but as equals. As conquerors. As the force that changed the galaxy forever. The exile had begun. But so had the resistance. The Velthari homeworld was called Kelvora, and it was nothing like Earth. The sky was orange instead of blue, and two suns hung in the heavens, one bright yellow and one deep red. The air was thick and warm, carrying strange smells that reminded Tejo of sulfur and honey mixed together. But despite all these differences, there was something familiar about this place. It felt alive. It felt like home. Tejo Kim walked through the streets of the Velthari capital city, his eyes wide with wonder. The buildings were tall and curved, made of a dark stone that seemed to absorb the light. Velthari citizens moved around him, their scales shimmering in the double sunlight. Some of them stared at him with curiosity. Others looked away, as if they were not sure what to make of this strange, soft-skinned creature. 3 weeks had passed since the human fleet arrived in the fringe. Admiral Una had established a temporary settlement on one of the moons of Kelvora, where the human refugees were beginning to build their new lives. But the real work, the work of building alliances, had only just begun, and that work fell to Tejo. He was scheduled to meet with Commander Varric and the Velthari Council of Elders. His mission was simple in theory, but difficult in practice. He needed to convince the Velthari that humans could be trusted. He needed to show them that together, they could build something stronger than either species could build alone. The meeting hall was located at the center of the city, inside a massive structure that looked like a giant shell. Armed guards stood at the entrance, their scales a dark blue that marked them as warriors. They watched Tejo approach but did not stop him. Vorik had granted him permission to enter. Inside, the hall was cool and dim. The walls were covered with carvings that told the history of the Velthari people. Tejo saw images of great battles, peaceful gatherings, and what looked like a terrible disaster. He made a mental note to ask about these stories. Later, at the far end of the hall, a long table waited. Seated around it were 12 Velthari, their scales ranging from deep green to bright gold. Commander Vorik sat at the center, and beside him was an ancient Velthari whose scales had faded to a pale gray. This was High Elder Sorth, the leader of the Velthari people. "Welcome, human," Sorth said. His voice was old and rough, like stones grinding together. "We have been waiting for you." Tejo bowed deeply, a gesture of respect he had learned from old Earth traditions. "I am honored to be here, High Elder. My people are grateful for your hospitality." Sorth studied him for a long moment. His golden eyes were sharp despite his age, missing nothing. "You are young," Sorth observed. "Why did your admiral send a young one to speak for your people?" Tejo smiled. "Because sometimes the young can see possibilities that the old have forgotten. And because my admiral believes that peace is built through understanding, not through power." A few of the elders exchanged glances. Sorth's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes that might have been approval. "Sit," Sorth said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Let us talk." Tejo sat down and folded his hands on the table. He knew this conversation would determine the fate of his people. He could not afford to make any mistakes. "The council banished you," Sorth began. They called you dangerous, said you spread too quickly, consumed too much. Tell me, human, is this true? Tejo considered the question carefully. He could lie, paint humanity in the best possible light. But he sensed that the Velthari valued honesty above all else. They had survived in the Fringe by learning to trust their instincts, and they would know if he was not telling the truth. Some of it is true, Tejo admitted. Humans do grow quickly. We adapt, we expand, we reach for new horizons. But we are not destroyers. We build, we create. We form bonds with those who treat us fairly. The Council was afraid of us not because we are evil, but because we are different. Because we do not accept limits that others place upon us. Soreth leaned back in his chair. The Council fears what it cannot control. We know this well. They abandoned us to the Fringe 300 years ago because we refused to bow to their laws. They said we were too aggressive, too proud. They said we would destroy ourselves. But you survived, Tejo said. We did more than survive, Vorik spoke up. We built a civilization. We made alliances with other abandoned species. We created something the Council never imagined. A community of outcasts. A family of the forgotten. Tejo felt his heart quicken. This was exactly what he had hoped to hear. Then perhaps we can join this family, he said. Perhaps humans can add our strength to yours. Together, we could build something the Council cannot ignore. The elders began to murmur among themselves. Some looked skeptical. Others seemed intrigued. But Soreth held up a hand, and silence fell. Words are easy, the High Elder said. Actions are hard. If you want the Velthari to trust humanity, you must prove yourselves. You must show us who you really are. Tejo nodded. Tell me what you need. Soreth's eyes glittered. There is a crisis on the moon of Keth Prime. The Keth are an insect species who have also been abandoned by the Council. A plague has struck their hive cities. They are dying by the thousands. We have sent aid, but we do not have enough resources. If you humans truly wish to be part of our community, go to Keth Prime. Help the Keth. Save them. It was a test. Tejo understood that immediately. The Velthari wanted to see if humans would risk themselves for strangers, for beings who looked nothing like them and had nothing to offer in return. I will speak with Admiral Yuna, Tejo said. We will send everything we can. For the first time, Soreth smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. Then perhaps there is hope for your people after all, he said. Go now, save the Keth, and when you return, we will talk again about the future. The journey to Keth Prime took 2 days. Tejo traveled aboard a small medical ship called the Mercy Dawn, accompanied by a team of human doctors and scientists. Admiral Yuna had not hesitated when he told her about the mission. She had immediately ordered supplies to be loaded and volunteers to be gathered. This is what we do, she had told him. We help those who need it. We prove that humanity is more than the Council says we are. Keth Prime was a dark world, covered in mountains and deep valleys. The Keth had built their cities inside these mountains, carving vast chambers that served as their homes. But now, those chambers were filled with the sick and dying. The plague was called the Silent Death because it killed without warning. A Keth would seem healthy one moment and collapse the next, their body shutting down as if someone had turned off a switch. The disease spread through the air, moving from one victim to the next with terrible speed. When Tejo stepped off the ship, he was greeted by a Keth elder named Chidok. The Keth were tall beings with hard shells and many limbs. Their eyes were large and compound, reflecting the dim light of the underground city. Chidok moved slowly, his limbs trembling with exhaustion. You came, Chidok said. His voice was a series of clicks and whistles, translated by a device hanging around his neck. The Velthari told us you might, but we did not believe them. Why not? Teho asked. Because no one helps the Keth, Chidek replied. We are insects. We are ugly. We have nothing to offer. Why would anyone save us? Teho looked at the old Keth, seeing the pain and hopelessness in his compound eyes. He thought about all the times humanity had been judged by its appearance, by its differences, by the fear it inspired in others. Because it is the right thing to do, Teho said simply. Because no one deserves to die alone and forgotten. Because we know what it feels like to be cast out and abandoned. We are not here for profit or power. We are here because you need help, and we can give it. Chidek was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered his head in a gesture of respect. Come, he said. I will take you to the sick. For the next 3 weeks, the human team worked without rest. The doctors studied the plague, searching for its cause and its cure. The scientists analyzed samples, ran experiments, and shared their findings with Keth healers. Teho served as the bridge between the two species, translating not just words but ideas, helping humans and Keth understand each other. It was hard work, and there were many failures. The plague was unlike anything human medicine had ever seen. For a while, it seemed like they would never find a cure, but humans were stubborn. They refused to give up. On the 18th day, a young doctor named Subin Park made a breakthrough. She discovered that the plague was caused by a type of fungus that had mutated due to a change in the planet's atmosphere. The cure was simple once they understood the problem. A combination of common medicines, mixed together in the right way, could kill the fungus and save the infected. Within days, the cure was being distributed throughout the hive cities. Keth, who had been near death, began to recover. The dying stopped. Life returned to Keth Prime. When it was over, Chidek came to see Teho one last time. The old Keth looked different now. His eyes were brighter, his movements stronger. Hope had returned to his people. You saved us, Chidek said. You came when no one else would. You stayed when others would have left. The Keth will never forget this. Whatever you need, wherever you go, we will be there. Your enemies are our enemies. Your friends are our friends. Teho shook his head. We do not want servants or soldiers. This is our home, and we will defend it until our last breath. The transmission ended. The war lasted for 2 years. 2 years of blood and fire and desperate struggle. 2 years of victories and defeats, of hope and despair, of moments when everything seemed lost and moments when the impossible became real. Admiral Kareth had expected to crush the coalition in weeks. Instead, his mighty armada found itself fighting shadows. Every time his ships advanced, they were ambushed from hidden positions. Every time they occupied a world, resistance fighters made them pay for every building, every street, every breath of air. The Fringe became a nightmare of endless warfare where the enemy was everywhere and nowhere at once. The coalition's strategy worked exactly as Yuna had planned. The Council's fleet, designed for overwhelming force in open battle, struggled to adapt to guerrilla tactics. Their ships were too large to navigate the asteroid fields where coalition fighters hid. Their commanders were too proud to retreat from battles they could not win. Their supply lines stretched across hostile space, vulnerable to constant raids. Month after month, the armada bled. Ships were destroyed. Crews were captured or killed. Morale collapsed as soldiers realized they were fighting an enemy that would never surrender, never give up, never stop. But the cost to the coalition was terrible as well. Thousands of ships were lost. Millions of lives ended. Entire worlds were occupied, their populations forced to live under council rule. There were times when Yuna wondered if they could hold on, if all their sacrifice would be enough. And then, everything changed. It started on a planet called Varith, deep inside council space. A group of workers refused to continue producing weapons for the armada. When soldiers came to force them back to work, the workers fought back. Other planets heard the news and followed their example. Other planets sample. Within weeks, protests and strikes spread across Council territory like wildfire. The Council had been so focused on the Fringe that they had forgotten about their own people. They had demanded more and more sacrifices for a war that had no end in sight. They had ignored the suffering of species who had grown tired of serving masters, who cared nothing for their lives. Now that anger exploded, Tejo watched the reports with growing excitement. "This is what we hoped for," he told Yuna. "The Council is losing control. Their empire is crumbling from within. Can we trust this uprising to help us?" Yuna asked carefully. She had learned to be cautious about hope. "I think we can do more than trust it," Tejo replied. "I think we can join it." The plan was bold, perhaps insane. Instead of waiting for the Council to withdraw, the Coalition would go on the offensive. They would send ships into Council space, not to conquer, but to support the rebels. They would show the galaxy that the Coalition stood for freedom, not just for the Fringe, but for everyone. It was the biggest risk they had ever taken. The Coalition fleet gathered at the edge of the Fringe. 3,000 ships, battered and scarred from 2 years of war, but crewed by beings who had learned to fight against impossible odds. Beside them flew ships from the rebel factions, vessels that had defected from Council control to join the fight for freedom. Yuna stood on the bridge of the Hope's Light, surrounded by her command staff. She had aged in the past 2 years. Her hair was streaked with gray, and lines had formed around her eyes. But her spirit remained unbroken. "All ships report ready," Commander Vorik announced. Yuna nodded. She looked at Tejo, who stood beside her as he always had. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Tejo smiled. "Only that I did not get to see how this story ends." "Then let us make sure we find out together." Yuna turned to face the main screen. "All ships, jump to Council space. It is time to end this war." The fleet vanished into hyperspace, carrying the hopes of the forgotten with them. They emerged in the heart of Council territory, near the capital world itself. The sight that greeted them was beyond anything they had imagined. The Council's home fleet was in chaos. Ships fought each other as loyalists clashed with rebels. Space stations burned with fires that could be seen from a planet's surface. Communication channels were filled with desperate calls for help, surrender offers, and declarations of independence. The Council was falling, but it was not finished yet. Admiral Kareth, recalled from the Fringe to defend the homeworld, still commanded a significant force. His ships were gathering near the Council's flagship, the Infinite Authority, preparing for a final stand. "They will fight to the death," Vorik observed. "Kareth has too much pride to surrender." "Then we give him the death he wants," Yuna replied grimly. "All ships, engage the Loyalist fleet. Target their flagship. Cut off the head, and the body will fall." The battle that followed would be remembered for 1,000 years. Coalition ships crashed into the Loyalist formation, like a wave breaking against rocks. Explosions lit up the void as vessels on both sides were destroyed. The Valkyrie led the charge, their warriors fighting with the fury of beings who had waited centuries for revenge. The Morvans sang battle songs that echoed through communication channels, ancient melodies that spoke of hope and defiance. The Keth moved in perfect coordination, their ships working together like the cells of a single organism. And at the center of it all were the humans, the species that had brought them all together, fighting alongside their eyes as equals. The Hope's light pushed deeper into the enemy formation, heading straight for the Infinite Authority. Yuna knew that if they could destroy the flagship, the Loyalist resistance would collapse. But Kareth was no fool. His ships formed a protective wall around the massive vessel, sacrificing themselves to keep it safe. "We cannot break through," Morik reported, his voice tight with frustration. Una studied the tactical display. There was one option left, but it meant risking everything. Open a channel to all coalition ships, she ordered. I have one last plan. Minutes later, every coalition vessel received the same message. What Una proposed was desperate, maybe even suicidal. But it was their only chance. The coalition fleet began to pull back, creating the appearance of retreat. The Loyalists, smelling victory, surged forward in pursuit. Exactly as Una had hoped. Now, she said quietly, all ships, execute. The coalition fleet split into dozens of smaller groups, each taking a different path through the battlefield. The Loyalists, confused by the sudden change in tactics, tried to follow. Their formation began to stretch, gaps appearing between ships as commanders chased different targets. And then the trap was sprung, from hidden positions, among debris and wreckage. A second wave of coalition ships appeared. These were the reserves, held back specifically for this moment. They slammed into the Loyalist fleet from every direction at once, catching the enemy completely off guard. The Loyalist formation shattered. The Hope's Light found its opening. The massive vessel accelerated toward the Infinite Authority, its weapons firing continuously. Enemy ships tried to block the path, but they were too late, too slow. Tejo, Una said, her voice calm despite everything. If this does not work, I want you to know that it has been an honor. Tejo looked at her with steady eyes. The honor was mine, Admiral. But I think we will be fine. The Hope's Light struck the Infinite Authority at full speed. Both ships shuddered with the impact. Explosions rippled across their surfaces as systems overloaded and hulls cracked. But the coalition ship had been modified for exactly this purpose. Its forward sections were reinforced, designed to punch through enemy armor. The Hope's Light tore into the flagship like a knife through flesh, penetrating deep into the heart of the vessel. Inside the Infinite Authority, chaos reigned. Admiral Karath watched the destruction spreading through his ship and knew that he had lost. It is over, one of his officers said, voice trembling. The coalition has won. Karath stood slowly, his old scales gray and tired. He had served the Council his entire life. He had believed in its mission, its order, its vision for the galaxy. And now it was all falling apart. No, he said quietly. It is not over. It is just beginning. Something new is being born today. I only wish I could see what it becomes. He transmitted a final order to all Loyalist ships. Stand down. The war was over. The news spread across the galaxy in hours. The Council had fallen. The High Speaker and its fellow members were captured. Their reign ended. The Fringe Coalition, led by the very species they had tried to destroy, now stood at the center of galactic power. But Una refused to take the Council's place. We did not fight for power, she told the assembled representatives of 100 species. We fought for freedom, for the right of every being to matter. If we simply replace the Council with ourselves, we have learned nothing. Instead, she proposed something new. A galactic assembly where every species, no matter how small or weak, had an equal voice. No more masters and servants. No more forgotten and favored. Just beings working together to build a future that belonged to everyone. It took years to create the new order. There were arguments, setbacks, and moments when everything threatened to fall apart. But slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to heal. Una lived to see the first meeting of the Galactic Assembly, where representatives from over 200 species gathered to shape their shared destiny. She was old by then, her hair completely white, her body tired from decades of struggle. But when she looked at what they had built, she felt a peace she had never known. We want partners. We want friends who stand beside us as equals. Chittek made a sound that might have been 2 years passed like water flowing through open hands. For Admiral Unipark, Those years were filled with endless travel, countless negotiations, and 1,000 small victories that slowly added up to something larger. She had not expected this journey when the Council first banished humanity to the Fringe. She had expected despair, struggle, and maybe a slow death in the darkness between stars. Instead, she found something far more precious. She found a purpose. The human settlement on Calvaris Moon had grown from a collection of temporary shelters into a thriving city. They called it New Dawn because that was what it represented. A new beginning. A new hope. The city was home to over 1 million humans now, and more arrived every month as the word spread through the Fringe. The outcasts were gathering, but Una spent little time in New Dawn. Her work took her across the Fringe, from one forgotten world to another, meeting species that the Council had thrown away. Each meeting was a challenge. Each negotiation was a test. But slowly, alliance by alliance, the coalition was growing. Today, she stood on the deck of a ship called the Rising Star, watching a water world grow larger on the main screen. This was Morvan Prime, home to an aquatic species called the Morvan. They were one of the oldest races in the Fringe, and they had refused to meet with anyone from outside their world for over 200 years. Until now, they agreed to see us? Tejo asked, standing beside her. He had become her closest advisor over the past 2 years, and she trusted him more than anyone else in the fleet. They agreed to let us land, Una replied. Whether they will actually speak with us remains to be seen. The Rising Star descended through thick clouds and emerged above an endless ocean. There was no land on Morvan Prime, only water stretching from horizon to horizon. Great storms raged in the distance, sending waves as tall as mountains crashing against each other. It was a violent, beautiful, terrifying world. A signal came through the communication system. A voice spoke, deep and flowing like a river. Human vessel, this is the voice of the deep. You may descend to the meeting point. Do not bring weapons. Do not bring lies. The Morvan will know if you do. Una nodded to the pilot. Take us down. The ship landed on a floating platform that rose from the water as they approached. It was made of some kind of coral, grown into a perfect circle that could support the weight of the vessel. Around the platform, shadows moved beneath the surface of the water, large shapes circling like curious predators. Una and Tejo stepped off the ship, leaving their weapons behind as instructed. The air was thick with salt and moisture, and the wind was strong enough to push against them with every gust dot from the water. A figure rose. The Morvan was massive, easily 3 times the size of a human. Its body was long and sleek, covered in scales that shifted colors like light through a prism. Its face was strange and alien, with wide dark eyes and a mouth filled with small, sharp teeth. But there was intelligence in those eyes, old and deep, like the ocean itself. I am High Tide Kareth, the creature said, its voice carrying easily over the wind. I speak for the Morvan. You are the humans we have heard stories about. Una bowed her head respectfully. I am Admiral Una Park. This is Diplomat Tejo Kim. We are honored to meet you. Kareth moved closer, studying them with those ancient eyes. The Velthari say you can be trusted. The Keth call you saviors. But the Morvan have learned to trust nothing that comes from the surface. Why should we believe you are different from the Council that abandoned us? Una had expected this question. She had prepared many answers, many arguments, many reasons why the Morvan should join the coalition. But now, standing before this ancient being, all those prepared words seemed hollow. Because we have nothing to offer you except ourselves, she said honestly. We have no great wealth. We have no powerful weapons. We have only our determination to survive and our willingness to help those who need it. The Council threw us away, just like they threw you away. We know what it feels like to be alone in the dark. We know what it feels like to be forgotten. She paused, meeting Kareth's gaze directly. "We are not asking you to serve us or follow us. We are asking you to stand beside us, to build something together. A coalition of the forgotten. A family of the abandoned. The Council believes we are weak because we are alone. But if we join together, we will be stronger than they ever imagined." Kareth was silent for a long moment. The wind howled around them, and the waves crashed against the platform. Finally, the great creature spoke. "The Morvan remember a time before the Council. We remember when the galaxy was young and full of promise. We remember what it was like to have hope." Kareth's eyes grew distant. "The Council took that hope from us. They told us we were too old, too slow, too set in our ways. They left us here to die." The creature moved closer still until its face was only meters from Yuna's. "But we did not die. We survived. We waited. And now you come to us speaking of hope and unity and a future where we matter again." Kareth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." "Perhaps both," Yuna replied with a small smile. Kareth studied her for another long moment. Then, slowly, the great creature nodded. "The Morvan will join your coalition, not because we believe you will succeed, but because we choose to hope again. And that is something we thought we had lost forever." The agreement with the Morvan changed everything. News spread across the fringe like fire through dry grass. The three most powerful species in the region had united under human leadership. Others began to take notice. Over the following months, delegations arrived at New Dawn from dozens of worlds. Some were small groups, just a handful of survivors from species that had been reduced to almost nothing. Others were larger, representing millions of beings who had lived in the fringe for generations. They came with questions and doubts and fears. They came with old grudges and ancient wounds. But they also came with hope, that precious thing that Yuna had once thought lost. Tejo worked harder than ever, meeting with each delegation, listening to their concerns, helping them find their place in the growing coalition. He became known across the fringe as the voice of understanding, the human who could bridge any gap and heal any division. "How do you do it?" Subin asked him one evening. The young doctor had stayed on Keth Prime for a year after the plague, helping rebuild their medical systems. Now she was back on New Dawn, working in the Coalition's central hospital. "How do you convince them all to trust each other?" Tejo smiled tiredly. He had not slept more than 4 hours a night for months. "I do not convince them to trust each other. I help them see what they have in common. Every species in the fringe has been hurt by the Council. Every one of them has known loss and pain and fear. When they realize that the being across the table feels the same things they do, trust comes naturally." "It cannot be that simple," Subin said. "It is not simple at all," Tejo admitted. "It is the hardest thing I have ever done. But it is also the most important." 1 year after the Morvan joined, the Coalition held its first formal assembly. Representatives from 47 species gathered in a great hall that had been built specifically for this purpose. It was located on neutral ground, a small moon that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time. Yuna stood at the front of the hall, looking out at the gathered delegates. She saw Velthri and Keth, Morvan and a dozen other species, whose names she had learned to pronounce, whose customs she had learned to respect. She saw beings that had been enemies for centuries, now sitting side by side. It was impossible. It was miraculous. It was exactly what the Council had feared. "Friends," Yuna began, her voice carrying through the hall. "We have gathered here today to mark the birth of something new. Something the galaxy has never seen before." She paused, letting the words sink in. "For too long, the Council has decided who matters and who does not. They have drawn lines across the stars, declaring some species worthy and others worthless. They have thrown away anyone who does not fit their vision of order. They believed that by scattering us, they would destroy us. Yuna's voice grew stronger. They were wrong. Because here, in the darkness of the Fringe, we found each other. Here, among the forgotten, we built a family. Here, in the place they sent us to die, we learned to live. The delegates began to murmur, voices rising in agreement. Today, we declare the formation of the Fringe Coalition. We declare that every species matters. Every voice counts. Every life has value. We declare that we will stand together against any threat, support each other through any crisis, and build a future where no one is thrown away. Yuna raised her hand. Today, we declare that we are not forgotten. We are not abandoned. We are not alone. We are the Coalition, and the galaxy will know our name. The hall erupted in cheers. Delegates rose to their feet, crying out in a dozen different languages. The Velthari stamped their feet. The Keth clicked their approval. The Morvans sang in deep harmonies that shook the walls. Taiho stood beside Yuna, watching the celebration with tears in his eyes. "We did it," he said quietly. "No," Yuna replied. "We started it. The real work is still to come." She was right, of course. The Council would not ignore this challenge forever. Eventually, the High Speaker of the Galactic Council had lived for over 3,000 years. In that time, it had seen empires rise and fall, wars begin and end, and countless species join the great community of stars. It had learned patience in ways that shorter-lived beings could never understand. It had learned to see patterns in the chaos of history, to predict what would come next, to control the future through careful manipulation of the present. But now, for the first time in centuries, the High Speaker felt something it had almost forgotten. Fear. The reports spread across the table were detailed and thorough, gathered by spies who had spent years infiltrating the Fringe. They described the growth of the Fringe Coalition in precise terms. Numbers of ships, sizes of armies, names of species that had joined the alliance, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, a unified government with representatives from nearly 60 different species, and at the center of it all, humans. "This is unacceptable," Council Member Vorath said. The purple-scaled alien slammed one of its 4 fists against the table. "We banished them. We sent them to die. How have they done this?" "Because we underestimated them," the High Speaker replied quietly. "We saw them as a nuisance, a minor problem to be swept away. We did not see them for what they truly are." "And what are they?" another council member asked. The High Speaker turned its cold silver gaze toward the speaker. "They are adapters, survivors. They do not accept defeat. They take every obstacle and turn it into an opportunity. We gave them nothing, and they built an empire." The chamber fell silent. The 12 council members looked at each other with expressions ranging from anger to fear to disbelief. "What do we do?" Vorath finally asked. The High Speaker stood slowly, its tall, thin body unfolding like a tower rising from the ground. "We do what should have been done from the beginning. We destroy them. Completely. We send a fleet to the Fringe and we wipe out every trace of this coalition. Every ship. Every settlement. Every being that dares to stand against us." "That will not be easy," another member warned. "The coalition has grown strong. They have ships and weapons and allies who will fight for them. Then we send a fleet large enough that strength will not matter," the High Speaker replied. "We send the Grand Armada. Every battlecruiser, every carrier, every destroyer we can spare. We show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the Council." The decision was made. Orders were sent. Across Council space, ships began to move. The Grand Armada assembled at the edge of Council territory. It was the largest military force ever gathered in the history of the galaxy. Over 10,000 warships, crewed by millions of soldiers from a dozen different species. At its head flew the Council's flagship, the Infinite Authority, a vessel so massive it could be seen from a planet's surface. Admiral Karath commanded the armada. He was a Velikan, a species known for their military genius and their absolute loyalty to the Council. His scales were gray with age, and his eyes were cold as the void between stars. "We will reach the Fringe in 30 standard days," Karath reported to the High Speaker through a secure communication channel. "Once there, we will engage and destroy the Coalition forces. I estimate complete victory within 2 weeks of arrival." The High Speaker nodded in satisfaction. "Leave nothing standing, Admiral. Let this be a lesson that echoes through history. The Council's enemies will be erased." "It will be done," Karath replied, and the connection ended. In New Dawn. The alarms began to sound. Una was in the middle of a meeting when her personal communicator buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at it and felt her blood turn cold. She excused herself immediately and hurried to the command center, where screens filled with data that confirmed her worst fears. "How many ships?" she asked. "Over 10,000, Commander Vorik replied. The Velthari had become one of her most trusted military advisors. "They are the largest fleet ever assembled. They will reach our borders in less than a month." Una stared at the display, watching the red dots that represented enemy vessels moving slowly but surely toward the Fringe. This was what she had always known would come. The Council would not ignore their defiance forever. "Can we fight them?" she asked. Vorik hesitated. That hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "Our combined fleet numbers 3,000 ships," he said finally. "We have brave crews and good commanders. But against those numbers," he shook his head, "if we meet them in open battle, we will be destroyed." Una closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about all the species that had joined the Coalition. The Velthari who had given them their first chance. The Keth who had called them saviors. The Morvan who had chosen to hope again. 60 different peoples who had trusted humanity to lead them toward a better future. She could not let them down. "Then we will not meet them in open battle," she said. "Call the Coalition Council. All representatives, emergency session. We have plans to make." The emergency session lasted for 3 days. Every species had opinions, fears, suggestions, and demands. Some wanted to surrender, hoping the Council would show mercy. Others wanted to scatter, flee to the farthest edges of space, and hope to be forgotten again. A few wanted to fight to the death, preferring to die free rather than live as slaves. But Una had a different plan. "The Council expects us to do one of 2 things," she explained to the assembled representatives. "They expect us to run or to fight in the way they understand. A great battle between fleets where their numbers will crush us. We will do neither." She activated a holographic display that showed the Fringe in detail. "Look at our home," she said. "The Fringe is not open space like Council territory. It is filled with nebulas, asteroid fields, dead stars, and gravitational anomalies. The Council's fleet is designed for clean battles in clear space. Here, that fleet becomes a weakness." Hightide Kareth, the Morvan representative, leaned forward with interest. "You propose to use the terrain against them. I propose to make them regret every moment they spend in our territory," Una replied. "We will not give them a single target to destroy. We will scatter our forces, hide them in places the Council cannot reach. And then, when their ships are spread out searching for us, we will strike." "Guerrilla warfare," Tahoe said quietly. He understood immediately. "Hit and run. Never let them pin us down. Make them bleed for every step they take." "Exactly." Una looked around the room at the representatives. "This will not be easy. We will lose ships and people. Some of our worlds may be occupied. But if we hold together, if we refuse to break, we can outlast them. The Council cannot maintain a fleet this size in hostile territory forever. Eventually, they will have to withdraw. Elder Chittick of the Keth clicked thoughtfully. And when they withdraw? Una smiled grimly. When they withdraw, we follow. We take the fight to them. We show them that the Fringe is not a place to throw away garbage. It is the birthplace of their greatest enemy. The vote was close, but in the end, the Coalition chose to fight. Preparations began immediately. Ships were moved to hidden locations throughout the Fringe. Supplies were stockpiled in underground bunkers. Evacuation plans were created for civilian populations. Every species contributed what they could, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that had never been done before. Taiho worked on the diplomatic front, reaching out to neutral parties who might be sympathetic to the Coalition's cause. He found more support than he expected. Many species in Council territory were unhappy with the current order, tired of being treated as lesser beings, afraid of what the Council might do to them next. They could not openly support the Coalition, but they could provide intelligence, supplies, and quiet encouragement. The Council has made many enemies, Taiho reported to Una. They just do not know it yet. As the day of the invasion approached, Una made one final address to the Coalition. She stood on the bridge of the Hope's Light, the same ship that had carried humanity into exile. Around her, a small fleet waited, ready to be the first line of defense. Across the Fringe, billions of beings watched her image on screens, waiting to hear what she would say. My friends, Una began. In a few hours, the Council's armada will enter our space. They come with 10,000 ships and the certainty that they will destroy us. They believe that we are weak, scattered, and afraid. They believe that when they arrive, we will break. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the faces of her crew. They are wrong. We are not weak. We are survivors. Every species in this coalition has faced darkness before and lived to see the light again. We have been abandoned, forgotten, and left to die. And yet here we stand, together, united, unbroken. Our voice grew stronger. The Council does not understand us. They think power comes from numbers, from size, from force. But we know the truth. Power comes from will. Power comes from purpose. Power comes from knowing what you are fighting for and refusing to give up until you have won. She raised her fist. We are fighting for our homes, our families, our future. We are fighting for the right to exist, to matter, to be remembered. We are fighting for every being who has ever been thrown away and told they were worthless. The crew began to cheer. Across the Fringe, voices rose in response. Let the Council come. Let them see what we have built. Let them learn what happens when the forgotten decide to stand. Because we are not going anywhere.